So we've invited the Doyle family this morning, and they have so graciously driven from near Buffalo, New York, to come out this morning. You drove in, and so the Lord brought them safely here. So that means the Lord wants them here, and actually we do too. Pam and I have known Arena and Dan now for probably, since 2015, right? When you visited, maybe? Oh, goodness, I'm sorry. Yeah, get rid of that teen. It's like in the 2008-9, yeah. And so, 19. All right, so we met in 1853. I'm sorry, my memory is horrible. Anyway, so now Arena and Dan, they've been missionaries to Nicaragua and Ecuador, and now there's a whole different type of ministry you guys are looking into, and that's what we're going to learn about this morning. And then Dan is going to preach this during the Sunday service as well. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm excited, and thank you for bringing, ladies, thank you all for coming. It's really big to have all you here. So why don't we pray for them, and then we'll have you come up, Dan, all right? Father, I praise you, Lord, for the safety you've given the Doyle family to come here. I thank you for how you've orchestrated through their lives the connections that have brought them to here today, and to have many churches in this area supporting them. I ask you, Father, give Dan especially a touch of your Holy Spirit upon him. Move him as he listens and seeks wisdom from him as he teaches us. We love you, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Come on.
Morning. It is good to be with you. Yeah, I think we've known each other since back when before he had gray hair, and when I still had hair. Yeah. So it's been a while.
Before this too, I think.
Yeah, there was not much of this. Well, it just migrated. The hair migrated. Yeah. Let me put a picture up here. You can see the crew if you haven't seen them over there. Some of you were in here when we were practicing a song. We don't always get to travel together because of schedules and things like that now. And so this is a blessing for us to have our whole family. You can see the names above each one if you can read the names from where you are, but I'll call it their names in age order, and you can match up the name with a daughter. But let me start with my wife. Irene and I have been married for 22 years this last August, and then God has given us these 6 beautiful daughters. And people will say things to me like, you poor guy, and what's it like, and what are the emotions? Is it a very emotional type of house? And they accuse me of being the emotional one. But I say with 6 princesses, that makes me a king. That's how I feel about it, right? So we have, from oldest to youngest, we have Eva, Annika, Audra, Ivy, Eden, and Isabella. And then we'll do a test at the end, all right? So come up and say hi to them. They're not shy. If you'd like to try your Spanish, everyone's fluent, so you can try your Spanish with anyone as well. Let me just back up a little bit because to give a little history of where we've come from, and then we'll catch up the history and then get into some of the pictures and talk about what's next for our family, what we're focusing on now. I was a pastor south of Buffalo years ago. It was kind of a church replant. There was about 30 people in the church. We had 2 daughters. They were a year and 6 months at the time, and expecting our 3rd daughter. And it turned into a church replant. The average age was 70 years old, and so it was a dying church. And God blessed. The church began to grow, and we began talking with the church, saying God has kept missions on our hearts. Our heart was to go to the mission field before we went there, and they said, we didn't think you were going to come. We thought you were going to go to the mission field, but we believe God led us there. We've seen how he has prepared us, or has used those circumstances to prepare us for the next step in the journey. And it's been pretty cool to see how God orchestrates all of that. So the church was growing. In fact, now all of those people that were originally there when we first went have either passed away or are shut in and rarely make it out of their house. But it went from 30 people to now probably between 70, 80 people, I think. Now, and most of them, I shouldn't say most of them. There was at one point I used to say most of them. A lot of them were new believers, people that we had discipled. There's been other people that have come along in the years after that as well. But we look back at, that's our home church, that's our sending church. It's just a tiny country church. It's not one of these, great big churches or whatever that you think, oh, they send missionaries like crazy or whatever. It's just a small country church. And we are blessed to call that home, our home church. And it's like going back and seeing your kids, right? John talks about I have no greater joy than to see my children walk in truth. And we go back and see how the Lord has worked in these people's lives, the people that we have had opportunity to disciple as new believers, and then to see them also leading people to Christ and discipling others. We just had a baptism, I think late summer, I guess it was, of this young couple. Now they're married and have 4 kids. I officiated their wedding years ago. But this new family that they just led to the Lord in the last couple of years, and they were baptized just late fall or late summer. And so it's a blessing to see what the Lord has done there. So we came to our church in 2009 and said, hey, the Lord is leading us to the mission field. We don't know where or when or how or any of those kinds of things. And they said, well, let's walk this journey together. And so long story short, they became our sending church. We went to Nicaragua in Central America with ABWE, that's the Association of Baptists for World Evangelism. Irena's parents were missionaries with them for 40 plus years, almost 50 years, I think. And so we just went there. For her, everyone was aunt and uncle, somebody, And so we just went there and went to Nicaragua and helped plant a specific church called La Gracia, Iglesia Bautista La Gracia, or that's Grace Baptist Church, right? Harkening back to the Brockport days. It was not named for that church at all, but there was no other church in Nicaragua called Grace Baptist. And so when we were coming together, we were working with a couple of young Nicaraguan families that would stay there as the pastor, the guys as the pastors. And they said, yeah, there's no other church named Grace Baptist here in Nicaragua. So that was the choice that we came to. But God led, the church started in our home with Bible studies in our home. Another church from Rochester was there for our very first Bible study in our home. It was pretty cool. That was Orchard. They were there for the very first Bible study. So it was cool to see how God led that and continued to do a work there in Managua, Nicaragua. And then we worked with church planters, training other Nicaraguan church planters that plant churches in Nicaragua. But there was another thing that we came to that has been our focus over the last several years that we'll get to in just a bit, talking about missions. Well, that's going to be our focus throughout the morning. But then in 2017, we were praying about next steps. Would we stay here? Would we take another step to go plant another church within Nicaragua? We were exploring, investigating around Nicaragua. And the Lord brought an opportunity to go to Ecuador. Our home church was encouraging us to leave ABWE and go with a brand new organization called Servant Leaders International that really had a focus for the local church. That the entire responsibility would fall back to the local church, not in Servant Leaders or any other organization, but the primary sending capacity would come back to the local church. That whole process would flow through the church, the local church, right? And so a church, and we had a friend, actually just lives up in Clay, that was going back to Ecuador, and he connected us with a church in Ecuador, and they said, we want to plant another church. We want to commission a few families. Would you come and help train to help plant this other church? And so we went to Ecuador in 2018 is when we arrived there. With this other family from the Syracuse area. And we worked together for several years. They came back to Syracuse a few years ago now, right? About maybe 3 years ago or something like that, whatever it is. And he's on the, we call it the oversight team or the board for Servant Leaders. And we've been good friends since our college days and everything. So we'll get, that kind of catches you up to where we have been in Ecuador, but let me tell you a little bit more about family. So Dave was trying to figure out, Pastor Dave, sorry, we have to remember Pastor Dave, Reverend, I'll call you Reverend. He would call you father? No. Pastor Dave was trying to figure out this picture of who was graduating. This is Word of Life Bible Institute graduation. So a few years ago, Eva, our oldest daughter, was out of high school, doing some classes online with Liberty, and wrestling with headaches. And so, because we live at about 9,000 feet in elevation, and it's just a constant headache. And so we said, maybe it's good for you to go back to the States, kind of get acclimated back. Well, that brought the two oldest back to the States. They came to Word of Life Bible Institute. That's a whole nother long story. But they came to Word of Life Bible Institute in Florida, did a year there, then went to second year this last year in Schroon Lake. And then Audra, our third daughter, did first year down in the campus in Florida this last year. So we came back just in time for some of the both graduations, both in Florida and in New York. And so you see the picture with our dogs. And so our dogs, the reason we came this morning is because we left the dogs in the house and came today, this morning, and then someone's letting them out of the house before we get back, and then we'll get back to let them out again. So we have to juggle those kinds of things as we're coming back. So they're Ecuadorian dogs. Someone asked me a couple weeks ago, what's an Ecuadorian dog? There's it's just a dog, right? But they came from Ecuador. Yeah. But they're trained, this is amazing to Ecuadorians that they don't understand Spanish. They're trained in English, right? Because we didn't want Ecuadorians giving them commands and telling them what to do or whatever. And it's just easier for us to command in English. So they don't you speak to them in Spanish, they won't understand what you're saying. So here's where we are in Western New York. We're near Marilla, New York, just outside of Buffalo, and enjoying the snow and cold and waiting for the next thing. That's sarcasm right there. Who can give me the definition of the word missionary? It's not a rhetorical question. I'll give you an opportunity to respond. Yes, ma'am.
It's the last one who is sent.
Very good. One who is sent. I think I have that up. Say it again.
Man of God.
Man of God. Okay. Yeah, I have some other definitions. I thought the definitions were up here first, but I put that one up there first. Yeah, one who is sent. We'll put some of the literal definitions up here in a second. But when we arrived in Latin America, we realized that the understanding of missionary or missions was what you see on the screen, a gringo that comes to my country, right? It was not about sending, it was about receiving, right? But it has this idea of being sent out. The word evangelist in the Greek has the word in there, angel, which again is messenger. That's the idea of an angel, a missionary, one who carries a message, someone who travels cross-culturally to spread the gospel. I'm trying to get more specific here in our definition, right? Here's a longer definition. A missionary is a qualified Christian sent out under the authority of a local church to an area of recognized need in order to pursue the work of the Great Commission, all right? And so you can see some of the elements in here. One who is sent out, someone who's taking the gospel, someone going to an area of need, going perhaps cross-culturally is our general understanding of a missionary, right? But this has been a struggle, I think, for Latin America. We went to Ecuador in 2018, and this was exciting for me to go to the country where one of the my heroes of the faith, passed away, Jim Elliot and the 5 missionaries, to the country where they died. For me, it was like, wow, this is incredible. I get to be in the same country where they were, right? But we have seen in Nicaragua, Ecuador, and some of the other countries that we've been involved with, that church has been planted. The church has grown, right? We have seen the fruit of missionaries over the last several decades that have gone there, and the fruit of their labor, the fruit of that ministry. But the idea in many churches and believers in Latin America has been, missions or a missionary is someone that comes here. So it's about receiving, not sending, right? So this has been something that we have been focused on and working through, both in Nicaragua and Ecuador. You'll hear me say those two countries because we've been involved still in Nicaragua even since we left living there. So this has been something that we've been focused on over the last several years to change that concept, change that understanding of missions, that the responsibility of the Great Commission is not just for North America. In fact, North America is not the #1 missionary sending country in the world anymore. It hasn't been for years now, right? It's a couple of Asian countries, Philippines, Korea, are sending more missionaries than the United States is. But Latin America is getting ready to explode, I think, of that possibility of sending missionaries to places that it's very difficult for North Americans to go, right? You go to that 1040 window, that's the Muslim area of the world, basically, right? North Africa into the Middle East and Asia is atheist or Muslim or Hindu, Buddhist or whatever. It's very difficult for North Americans to go there, to be outspoken there, to lead things missions-wise or church-related. But many Latin American people could go there a lot easier, okay? So we've been focusing on this idea of sending. Let me talk a little bit about servant leaders, all right? You think, well, who is servant leaders? I haven't heard of them. It's just about 20 families or so. It's not a large organization either, but we've come together more for a philosophical alignment rather than just doctrine. Doctrinally, of course, we're aligned. It's Baptistic in background, but more philosophy of coming together that way. So here's who we are. We servant leaders exist to partner with the local church to mentor, mobilize, and multiply its ministry and leadership potential. So this is not who servant leaders is. This is what servant leaders, why servant leaders exist, for the fortification of the church. So everything that we ever ask before we do something is, how would this benefit the local church? So let me give you an example. We don't have a home office. Everyone is remote. We have people here in Syracuse, Delaware, Michigan, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Europe. It's several different countries, right? But no home office. And we've talked about that in the past, or what about a property in Latin America, a place for people to come to? But often what happens is that with good intentions, we build a home office or something along those lines, a camp or whatever it might be. And pretty soon, instead of serving the church has to support that, right? So we want everything we do to be in support of the church. Now, that's not to badmouth anybody who has a home office or anything else. It's just a philosophical thing, approach that we have taken. Here's the vision that we have. Our vision is for local churches to take the primary responsibility for the mentoring and mobilization of its members, resulting in a healthy local church capable of multiplication through the sending out of servant leaders to launch new churches. We believe in churches planting churches. Now, many times you say, oh, the Doyles, they're church planting missionaries. And that's true in one sense of the word, but we're helping churches. You heard me refer to the church in Ecuador, where we went there to help train them to plant a church. Right? I'm not going to be there long term. The goal is not for me to be there for 30 years. Right? That was kind of an old school way of doing it. You go there, you're there for 30 years, you hope that you can get a guy to lead that and have enough money to support him when you leave. That's kind of the old school way of doing things. We believe that churches plant churches, so let's train them to lead the church in their context and their culture, with or without us. Right? So that's kind of the idea. We exist to help the church to plant a church. So here's what we do, right? We're planting churches by empowering the churches with those 3 M's, the mentor, mobilize, and multiply, right? Mentor, we could say discipling, to equip, to build up, to mobilize them into ministry, first in their own context, in their local church. We want to see them move from spectators to participants, right? We have too many people who are just watching. I told Pastor Dave, if I can let the secret out, Audrey and I get to go to the Bills game later. I'm a big Bills fan, right? We get to go to the Bills game. But usually you say this, that at a sporting event like that, you have like 70,000, you have 22 people on the field badly in need of rest, and 70,000 people in the field badly in need of exercise. And the church kind of reflects that, right? You have a few people badly in need of rest, and you have a lot of people badly in need of exercise, or to exercise their gifts to serve the Lord. And we want to see people mobilizing in ministry first in the context of their local church. And then eventually to see that multiply, to export what we're doing here, to export that out to a church plant and even into international missions. So some of the things that Servant Leaders offers churches is establishing systems to sustain that. So donations, resources, things along along that nature, and then equipping the church to send. That's some of the training as well. All right, so I mentioned this in a roundabout way already, that the North American church, or the North American missionary, has changed from being the primary church planter to equipping and empowering team members to lead. So our role has been not to be that pastor, church planter, and things like that. ever since we came to Nicaragua, first of all, we came there with an idea of planting a church, but looking first of all for a national family, Nicaraguan or Ecuadorian, wherever we were, that would eventually be the leader. That we want to partner with that family, that guy, and so when it's time for us to step back, it wasn't like, well, here's a guy, here's a pastor, right? It was primarily equipping him and his family first, and then planting the church together and working together in that way, all right? So here's one of the very first couples we had opportunity to disciple. This is, we call him Gato in Lorena. Who knows what Gato is?
Cat.
A cat. His name is Alex, right? But we call him Gato. If the picture was clear, you could see his eyes are green, which is unusual for a Latino, right? So Alex and Lorena, and they were teenagers when we first met them. They're now married and have a couple of kids. And is this online? I don't know. Don't spread the word along, but there's one on the way. And so we're excited about that as well. But they were the very first couple sent from Nicaragua, came to Ecuador in 2019 as missionary interns. The very first couple that their church had ever sent, that not just their church, but they're in an association, or they call it a convention of churches, about 50 churches, the very first ones that had ever sent internationally. It's complicated, right? Visas, finances. We come here like this on a Sunday morning and say, hey, we're the Doyles. Yeah, we're raising support. That's part of what we do as well. That's a foreign concept in Latin America. They don't send missionaries. They don't support missionaries as a whole. Once in a while, you find a church that does that, right? And so they raised 80% of their support from Nicaragua to come to Ecuador for 1 year in an observing, learning capacity. And one of the things that they learned was how to start a family. And so she became pregnant during their time there and went back to Nicaragua for the birth of their son, their very first son, Joshua Daniel. And so that was in January 2020, they went back to Nicaragua with the thought of, okay, we're going to wait for Joshua to be born and then see where God would lead us internationally, to be sent internationally, maybe to that 1040 window. And we were going to start exploring how God would lead. And if you've tracked those dates, this was 2020, right? And everything shut down and they couldn't go anywhere. And a church plant that their home church was involved in, their pastor, the church planter, died with COVID early on. And they came and said, do you have someone that can help us? So Alex went first with his family, and they were filling in a little bit. And they said, would you stay? Then we began to evaluate with them, okay, what's the situation? What does it need? And we determined this church, we need to replant. Just start from scratch again. Replant. There was about 8 people. They were meeting in the side yard of someone's home. We said, let's just replant from the start or all over again, right? And so Alex followed the same model of bringing along a couple of guys and their wives to the leadership team, investing in them to be the pastors going forward. And his heart is for missions and church planting. And so they're actually coming to the end of this, where about another year or so, that the goal is for them to go with a couple of others to go plant a church, again, on the other side of the city from where this church plant is. But God has blessed. The church has grown. He's provided land and a building. And they are very intentional about, many times when we build a building, we have certain things in mind, right? We want a large room where we can meet for worship, right? But I don't mean this to criticize your church or any other church, but many times we can only do one thing in here, right? You can't take all these pews out and do something else, on Wednesday or Thursday or something like that, right? It would be quite an undertaking, right? But so when they built the building, the idea was, what are we doing? What is our purpose? Yes, it's to meet for worship, to gather together, to grow together and things like that. But to do that through internships, that's been our focus, to do this through local church internships. So they've done things like build a couple of cabins. And these are pretty crude cabins. Nicaragua is the poorest country, second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Haiti is the poorest. It's the poorest Spanish-speaking country in the Western Hemisphere. And I know you get to split hairs. Maybe you've been to Honduras or Venezuela or whatever it might be. But it's traditionally been the poorest Spanish-speaking country. But the church has grown, and God has brought interns through just over the last, since 2020, has brought several interns. If I can I back up here? The girl on the right she's a medical doctor, did a one-year internship with through this local church. It's actually Lorena's sister. Lorena is Alex's wife, and this is his sister-in-law. She's a medical doctor, did a local church internship, and is now officially part of the servant leaders team, working with them in this church plant as well. And then several interns have come through, and this is the idea that they will go out to plant another church in the near future. One of the things that we do, talking about sending, the Latin American church sending missionaries, you remember I said that it's a foreign concept for them to go and raise support. There's little to no finances in the churches. Many times they have trouble supporting their own pastor. And I know many churches in the U.S. are like that too, where a pastor works a side job, or the wife works, or both, or whatever. Churches are looking to survive. But there are more resources here than there are in Latin America. It's just the fact of it. And so one of the things that we have focused on was partnering churches from North America with churches in either Nicaragua or Ecuador or others. And so this church came down. This is from just south of Buffalo. They came down this summer. And this is funny. Someone gave us a gift card for the Cheesecake Factory for Christmas. And so we're like, well, let's go get some. Was that Friday night? We went over, we're like, Friday night, let's go to the Cheesecake Factory. We're going to sit down and eat. We got there, it was packed. There was a line. We're like, all right, let's just get something and go home. We'll eat it at home. We got there, we're waiting in line. And the guy with the beard here comes passing by. He lives like an hour from the Cheesecake Factory. We live like a half an hour from there. And we saw him, we're like, Mark, what are you doing here? So he had gift cards too. So we just connected that way. But they were in Nicaragua this last summer with Paul. And he told me, so Paul, it's Pastor Paul in the hat, and Mark, and I'm not sure who else, but they have a few families that said, we came back from Nicaragua and God just was working in our hearts. We're going to plant a church in Springville, New York. And so those 5 families have come together over the last few months, and their church is missional in its thinking, and they're going to go plant a church where there's a need. And so we're excited to see not just how they can support the work in Nicaragua, but how that impacts their home church or their community here back even in New York, right? So it's some of the church planting that we've been involved in Ecuador. Some of it we've helped plant a church, and I don't think I have any pictures. The girls always tell me this, but I don't have any pictures of the church that we directly were planting that I've mentioned a couple of times already. But some of it's by extension, helping churches, equipping churches to send their people. So Stalin is this guy here, and Jessica is his wife and their kids. They went through a 2-year internship, a 1-year local church pastoral internship, and then another about 6 months of church planting internship. And they're now leading that church plant in a very rural area of Ecuador. And so we have had the opportunity to walk alongside their church, to walk alongside of them as they are being used by God. And you can see the waterfall behind me, or behind us in the picture. There's like 15 waterfalls in this property. So one day we went hiking with them. We saw a few of the waterfalls. I think we were there for, there was a ministry event, but all I remember is hiking for the waterfall. But anyway, one of the things we do, this is another church that came down this is here just over in Sodus, New York. This is where Rex Fisher was for a while, right? You guys probably don't know all these people. We have these connections, right? So Rex was in Sodus, and so the church where he used to be came down to Ecuador, came out to this place where Stalin and Jessica are, and we did a week of VBS. And again, it's just partnering them together to understand, for them to meet the people face to face, to understand the context, and support them in that. So we're excited to see all of that happen. This is the team that we did VBS with. Now, this is a small town or village surrounded by farms, right? So people generally are living inside, and they go out inside the village, they go out to work their farm. And in this picture is made up of people coming down from New York, the church in Sodus, New York, that came down. The sending church in Quito, Ecuador, and also the people from the church plant. So this makes up 3 different churches that got together to do a VBS for the week. And I think we had about 70 or 80 kids on average that came every day that week. Just an opportunity to make connections in the community once again. And so we're pretty excited about that. Let me talk about international missions, get back to that, because this is the goal, not just to plant churches in Ecuador or Nicaragua, but to see churches then sending missionaries internationally. You can see by the size of our girls, there's braces and things like that, if you maybe you can't see it from where you are, but this is 2017, I think it was. I think it was 2017 or 18, somewhere in there. No, that's not right, 2020, right before everything, or I think this was actually like during COVID. She like sneaked out of the house. We had 2 p.m. curfews. Christina sneaked out, came to visit us because we were getting ready to come back to the States. And she was like, I don't know when I'm going to see you again. When's the world going to go back to normal? And so she came over to visit us before we left. And she had also done an internship through her local church. She's a dentist. She has gone through the Lafayette's program for the biblical counseling, all at the same time. It wasn't like, well, I'll do this for, she was studying to be a dentist as well as doing a local church internship, which is like taking a 1 to 2 year Bible Institute courses, as well as going through the biblical counseling stuff. She's just an incredible young lady, but was just sent from her church in August as an international missionary sent to Spain. Very first missionary their church, the only missionary their church has ever sent. This is incredible to see what God is doing, raising up Latinos, or Latina in this case, to be sent internationally. Now, there are some interesting circumstances to allow that to happen. Her mom is there. She's able to live with her mom. So she graduated 4 years ago. I think 2020, 21, somewhere in there, led her mom to the Lord. And there's no church. She's been looking for a church. She's gone an hour, 2 hours away looking for a church. She's in Madrid, which is a city of several million people, and there's no gospel. Now, sometimes people say that no gospel-believing church. Sometimes we say that like, well, we don't cross our T's and dot our I's exactly like them. No, I'm literally mean there are no gospel-believing churches close to her. And so this is a struggle for her and her mom as a new believer, just a couple years old in the faith. And so we're praying for a team to rise up and go with her to plant churches in Spain and have another launch point from there to go into the rest of the 1040 window. I had another picture here, as I forgot to put this up. This is her church commissioning her and sending her out. This is this church in Cuenca, Ecuador. Well, I tell people we don't just carry the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, we also carry the gospel of the Buffalo Bills. I've told you already, I'm a big Bills fan. So I grew up in Rochester. We've lived in Buffalo area for a year. That's been kind of our home base. And some of the guys, when we got there in 2017 or 18, I guess, in the Quito area, particularly in 2021 is when we arrived in Quito, they said, we like the violence of American football. We don't understand it. And so we said, well, okay, well, let's watch games together. I'm going to watch the game every Sunday. We'll watch the games together. And so we'd pause the game and I say, okay, well, here's what's happening. They got to get a first down. They've got 4 tries. They got to get a touchdown, all these guys. So these guys here, they understand football. And so we'd get together several times through the season. We watch games together. So it was a lot of fun. We even, Darwin and I, you see Darwin? Darwin's a pastor that we work with. He was in a car accident at 14 years old. Just celebrated his 22nd or 23rd year of being in a wheelchair. And he says celebrate that. They go out to dinner that night. He was 14 years old when that happened. They go out to dinner with he and his wife and their daughter to celebrate that because God used that to change his life, to bring him to Christ, to lead him to a church, to become a pastor. So he celebrates his paralysis because God used that to get a hold of his life. But I've converted him to be a Buffalo Bills fan. This is part of our team. This represents Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Ecuador, that we work together. So we talk about being a team, and so we'll gather together to talk about strategies and needs. How can we collaborate? How can we cross-pollinate? And so people will they'll go from Ecuador to Nicaragua, Nicaragua to Costa Rica, Costa Rica to Ecuador, or whatever it might be, and there's other countries involved, but those are the main countries that we've been involved in. And so it's pretty exciting. This is what my week looks like. From week to week where I'm on calls like this, or if you look at my phone, texting and calling and messaging and things like this, of God, in 2020, with the whole thing of COVID and lockdowns and everything, it opened up a whole new world. For many people, we were already doing it, using technology. We have a whole training system online that people can access. We've had, right now, I think we have about 100 students throughout Latin America that are going through, basically it's like a 1 to 2 year Bible Institute program. And we do mentoring through that as well. It's not just, hey, here's a course. It's not just about putting a bunch of knowledge in someone's head. It's about changing character, right? I say that I've never seen a pastor disqualified for what he did or didn't know. A pastor or missionary is almost always disqualified because of their character or moral decisions, right? And so we want to see people grow not just in their knowledge, but in their character and in their ability too. Right? So that's what we focus on. We say head, heart, and hands, right? So it's knowledge, character, and skill. And so we do this through mentoring, whether in a group. Sometimes these are all leaders that we're working with here that are leading other people through these courses that they're working in that process of the head, heart, and hands with people around the world.
Real quick,
Yeah.
I know we didn't talk about this right fully 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. I'm wrapping up here. We're coming to the end. And if you want to, I don't know if we can do a question or two. We'll try to wrap this up, and if we got a minute or two, then we'll do that. Talking about keeping missions in front of people, we have every 2 years, we have Ethnos Missions Academy. This is not Ethnos 360 or New Tribes. This is servant leaders sponsored activity that we bring local churches together, mostly from Latin America, some coming from the U.S. We've had other international students there as well. Our very first one was in Germany back in 2019. Then 2 years later, we were in Ecuador in 21. You can see here in 2023, we were in Costa Rica. Annika has been at every one of those so far, and her goal is to be at the next one. Is back in Ecuador this summer, and so we're looking forward to doing that. This is, if you watch commercials, if you're going to watch any of the football games or whatever else, I don't know if they're still showing this, but they'll show a Starbucks commercial, and right at the very beginning, it'll say Alsacia. And this is the Alsacia coffee farm where we're at. I didn't know anything about it until we went there, and someone, oh yeah, there's a Starbucks. We're like, well, let's go see it. And so it was a beautiful place, another waterfall. I like waterfalls. But then we were watching the football game earlier in the year. I'm like, it said Alsacia and showed almost a picture like this. I'm like, I know that place. I've been there. So that's my claim to fame. All right, wrapping up here. We are about $2,000 a month in need of support. Things have changed for us just in coming back with churches saying, well, you're going to be back in the States now. You're going to be based out of here. We're going to be doing almost the same thing. There's a few different other responsibilities. But churches said we want to support missionaries that live overseas. And so that's been a struggle where that's put us about $2,000 a month behind in support. And so we wanted to just put that out to you to pray about. It's interesting that about 20% of our support, a little over 20% of our supporters are actually individuals, not just churches. And so we praise the Lord for that. We ask other prayer requests. If you think of our family, you can pray for our daughters as they are in this transition. We came back for them. I guess I didn't make that clear at the beginning, that we came back for our daughters. They're in this transitional period of life, and so we said family is our first priority, family is our first ministry, and so if that means living back here in the States, we need to do that and then see what life and ministry looks like from that point. And so they're all well, there's no big problem or anything like that, but they're all well spiritually, emotionally, but they're in this transitional point of ready to be launched into the next steps, and so we came back for that. And then finally, we're in a parsonage right now. Church has allowed us as missionaries to live there, but our prayer is to be able to find somewhere to live permanently. The plan is to go to Florida, to be able to travel easier to Latin America and escape the snow, quite honestly. We have some supporting churches in Florida. My sister's down there too, so there's some other things. But our servant leaders actually said it would be better for you guys to live in Florida to travel easier. We have 1 minute. Is there any pressing question that someone would have? A couple maybe.
It's always been my understanding that the government of Nicaragua has been somewhat hostile.
Yeah.
Have any?
Oh yeah, I can tell you stories. If I can fit stories into the next hour, I may share a story or two. But we've had several instances. They are actually kicking out any nonprofits if there's any kind of discrepancy. They had a big protest between the government and the people back in 2018, and now all these years later, as they're finding people that had anything to do, if they said anything on social media, whatever else, to support anything anti-government, they're taking away their nonprofit status, kicking them out of the country, and so it's a very tenuous time Yeah, I mean, Nicaragua is defined by civil war and poverty and corruption and all of that, so it's been very difficult.
I have always had a question about church, because there have been church plants in the area, and I've always struggled with why not come alongside a church that might be dying and double up
Yeah.
and come alongside them and train them. Is that something that you do, or is that like beating your head against a rock because
Yeah.
people are setting?
We've not done too much here in the States. We replanted a church way back, and they didn't even understand it as a replant, right? That's a whole nother story. But yes, sometimes there's people, it takes a lot of humility, first of all. Churches want to be autonomous and independent, and they want to do things their way, even to the point of death, right? Where the church is just going to die then, right? And there's one concept that churches have a life cycle. Right, so sometimes one has to die, and then you can replant another. So it's interesting. I won't tell you the town. We have a supporting church in a particular town, and another friend and his church are planting a church in that town. They asked about coming alongside and working together, and they were like, "No, we want to do our thing. You guys do their thing." And doctrinally, there's no difference, right? So this church here is just maintaining, or perhaps even dwindling. And then my friend's church, their church is booming, right? There's new life and new focus, new vision, and all of that. So there's a lot. You'd have to evaluate. One of the things we do is we go in, we look at things more internationally, right? Latin America, we've been invited to go to Mexico or other places to see, hey, here's what the opportunity is, here's what the need is, what can we do? So we kind of evaluate and say, well, let's make a plan. What's the plan going forward? But it takes a lot of humility for churches to come together, merge, or whatever it might be. So, yes, sir, last question.
Very quickly, I think most people here probably not familiar with the term 1040. Talk about most. If you talk about where 1040.
Yeah, so the 1040 are the latitude lines. If you look at a map, you could find the latitude, longitude lines that kind of make up that window of the world, which includes North Africa into the Middle East, all those Middle Eastern countries, into China, and back in Mongolia, Russia, a little bit of Russia. And so predominantly the belief systems in that area of the world, in that 1040 window, is Muslim, atheism, or Hindu or Buddhist. So the Christian population in that area of the world is less than 1%, like less than 10% of 1%. It's very, 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 very small. All right, well, thank you for letting me come. I don't want to be the missionary that stayed too long and spoke too long. So thank you for having us. It's a blessing to be with you this morning. We're going to be around. We'd love to be able to